The desert was silent. The people of Israel camped at the base of a mountain that seemed to scrape the heavens, Mount Sinai. For days, they had watched as a thick cloud settled on its peak, flashing with fire, rumbling with thunder, and then the trumpet sounded, a sound unlike any they had heard before, not from men, but from heaven itself. The ground shook. Children clung to their mothers. Warriors dropped to their knees. Every heart pounded with fear. God had come down. Moses was called to ascend. Step by step, he climbed into the smoke, into the fire, into the presence of the Almighty. The people watched, trembling from below. What would God say? What could be so important that the mountain itself quaked to deliver it? And then he spoke. His voice rolled like thunder, echoing across the desert sands. Words that would carve history. Words that would shape a nation. You shall have no other gods before me. The people gasped. They remembered Egypt, a land filled with statues, idols, false gods of stone and gold. But this God, the God who split the sea, the God who rained down manna, declared he alone was worthy of worship. No rivals, no substitutes. Then came the second command. You shall not make for yourself an idol. The fire on Sinai burned bright, and they understood. The living God could not be contained in wood or metal. He was greater than images, greater than imagination. The voice thundered again. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. God's name was not to be spoken lightly, not as a curse, not as an empty word. His name carried his very presence, and his people were to treat it with reverence. The mountain trembled, and the fourth commandment came. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 1 day out of 7, set apart for rest, for worship, for remembering the God who created heaven and earth. A gift, not a burden. A day of trust in the God who provides. The voice grew louder still. Honor your father and your mother. The family was sacred, the foundation of the nation. To dishonor parents was to dishonor God, but to honor them was to walk in blessing. To live long in the land he would give, and the commands cut deeper. You shall not murder. Life itself was holy. Every breath, every heartbeat was formed by the Creator. To shed blood was to strike at the image of God. You shall not commit adultery. Marriage was more than a union of two people. It was a covenant, a reflection of God's own faithfulness. To betray, it was to break what was sacred. You shall not steal. Trust held the community together. To take what was not yours was to reject the God who promised to provide. You shall not bear false witness. Words carried power. Lies destroyed families, ruined lives, and spread injustice. But truth reflected the very nature of God. And then came the final command. You shall not covet. Unlike the others, this one pierced the heart. It was not about outward actions, but inward desires. Jealousy, envy, discontent. God was not only watching what they did, but what they longed for in secret. When the voice fell silent, the mountain still burned with fire. The people were terrified. Moses, they cried, speak to us yourself, but do not let God speak to us, or we will die. The law had done its work. It revealed the holiness of God and the weakness of man. No one could keep these commandments perfectly. Not Israel, not us. But even then, hidden in the thunder and smoke, God's plan of mercy was at work. For the commandments were not the end. They were a signpost pointing forward to the one who would fulfill them all. Generations later, a man would walk the dusty roads of Israel. He would never bow to another God, never misuse the holy name, never dishonor his Father in heaven. He would live the law in full perfection. And then he would carry the curse of our disobedience on a cross. His name was Jesus. The 10 Commandments were carved in stone, unchanging and eternal. But through Christ, God would carve his law on human hearts, not written by fire on rock, but written by grace in the soul. And so today, the thunder of Sinai still echoes. The question remains, will we listen? Will we walk in God's blueprint, not by stone tablets, but by hearts transformed? Because the God who shook the mountain is the same God who calls us now not to fear, but to freedom, not to slavery under sin, but to life in Christ. Sinai still speaks today, calling his people to walk in his ways, and find in Christ the grace that transforms.